Hello, Kevin.
Hello, Bruce.
Right, so this is another episode in our series on great California novels, and we are dealing with Raymond Chandler's The Big Sleep. Great title. Now, why? We'll start with you. Why do you think this is a great California novel?
Well, again, I have to narrow it in this case to an Los Angeles novel, and it's just one of the great novels, period. I would argue, in American literature, uh, in the 20th century, published 1939, and great because we have the great author, in my view, Raymond Chandler, uh, directing this thing. He's the intelligence behind this, and we'll talk about what he brings to detective fiction, to crime novel writing. That was new, right? We'll talk about that later. But the writing is the main thing here. It's just superb, uh, and it's doing all kinds of things at once. Again, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself because I do want to get into his writing in detail later on. But just to cut to the chase, what he brings to this genre of detective fiction, and just think of the great detective writers. Okay, we start off with Edgar Allan Poe, go through Conan Doyle, Agatha Christie, Dashiell Hammett. What he brings to this genre that no one else had done to that point is he brings A, poetry, and B, humor. And sometimes he combines the poetry and the humor in the same breath. It's breathtaking, his performance, I think. So that for starters, that's why I think it's a great American novel.
Let's quickly go through the criteria which you came up with for a
I
great
was
novel. And
afraid you were going to do that this time.
yeah,
I'm
yeah,
not
you
sure
go
if the
go
criteria
go
fit.
through your criteria, and then I'll add my
Yeah.
criteria. So your first two criteria were what?
Well, everyone's from somewhere else. And I will make a case for that still here, although no one is explicitly from somewhere else except in a couple cases. However, in the main case, Philip Marlowe, our hero, he is from Santa Rosa, California. You read this in Raymond Chandler's letters. That's where he wants him to be from. So he's from there. He's not from Los Angeles. And the other criterion is that everyone's playing a role. And I will argue that one as well. Basically, we're in a criminal milieu. Everyone has a pose, they're posturing, they're trying to get away with something. And so they're assuming a different identity than who they really are. So my two criteria are met, maybe not in an explicit fashion, in such an emphatic way as I would hope, as in the other ones, but I think they are met. And now on to you and your
Yeah.
addendum
Thank you.
criterion.
I totally agree. So I've got my own criteria, which I've added in our discussions, our prior discussions, just on the first two criteria, which are all yours. Um, everybody's from somewhere else. It's interesting. Philip Marlowe is nearby, right? The fictional he's from Santa Rosa. He's
Yeah.
nearby. He's a Californian. But
Yes.
interestingly, the author is British born. He's an immigrant into California. So he is really from somewhere else, like
Yeah.
Evelyn Waugh, another author we've discussed here. So he brings this outsider's perspective, and yet he channels himself through this Californian who has a very particular cynical California way of speaking. And I believe, and we maybe should discuss this later. I believe Raymond Chandler has a great ear for the local voice. And I did not actually. I'm jumping ahead of myself as well. I did not spot any inaccuracies in local language, unlike when I was reading Evelyn Waugh. So that's what I wanted to add on that first criterion. Everyone's from somewhere else. The author is very definitely from somewhere else. Now, the second criteria was everybody's playing a role. There's some interesting nuances this I really wanted to talk to you about because you're the expert on the era and California as a whole. Um, he in this novel, Raymond Chandler actually sort of breaks the third wall, or the fourth wall. I'm sorry, breaks the fourth wall if we use the metaphor for stage plays, where he a couple of times he says, they're acting in the way that Hollywood makes them think tough guys speak and act.
That's right.
And
Yeah.
I was like, oh my God, he's breaking the fourth wall, because you are reminding us that this is fiction, and that
Yeah.
it one criticism you could make about Raymond Chandler is it overstates the exceptionalism, the otherness of this criminal underworld. And in fact, everybody's in the criminal underworld, right? Los Angeles is
Yeah.
this dark alter ego. And
Yeah.
in fact, something else I found fascinating. It's wet. It's dark. It's wet. It's dingy.
Ta-da! Yeah.
It's not golden. It's not
Yeah.
dry. It's not warm. It's not happy, and everybody's sort of uh colorful and fit and running on the beach. There's none of that. It is noir. It is noir fiction. And I think this is where you can correct me. I think he essentially invented this uh rather exaggerated noir world where everybody is a sinner, if not a criminal, and everybody's cynical and beaten up and making wry jokes and about to shoot each other.
Yeah.
So there's some things for you to think about. No, just to finish my criteria. So in other novels in our series, I have realized that all the women are vamps, or maybe they're prostitutes. Now, we don't really have prostitutes, I don't think. You can correct me if I'm wrong. I did not pick up any prostitutes, but all the women are vamps. There are no heroines here. In fact, there's a murderess, there's promiscuity, there's mental ill health, which we should discuss. So all the women are vamps. Um, and then I'm forgetting everything that I added in previous series. But I think the novelist has a cynicism, the same cynicism about architecture and about culture that we've seen in every single one of these novels in this series. So with that, let's move on. Let's move on. What your response is first?
Well, I think you're exactly right. I think Raymond Chandler was um, the locus animus behind film noir. Not only his novels, but he also co-wrote the screenplay with Billy Wilder of arguably the first through and through film noir, Double Indemnity, 1944. So I mean, come on, you don't get more pole positioned than that. And I think everyone who has come after Chandler, they're writing in his shadow, especially if they're writing about Los Angeles, whoever they might be. He's sort of he sort of is. I would call him a classic. His many of his novels about Los Angeles, The Big Sleep included, I would call classics because he has pretty much exhausted the form. I haven't read anything that uh, even gets close to achieving his combination of talents. Again, I mentioned the poetry, I mentioned the humor. He has great pace. His novels just move along. I, even having read this thing for the fifth or sixth time at this point, I was making notes of the march saying, man, the pace here is incredible. He just moves along. We can talk about how he maybe achieved that because he had a certain style of writing, which was very, very interesting. In fact, I insist we talk about that, but not now. And he just had a great eye for the telling detail, which you have alluded to with how he describes the furnishings in houses or apartments. How do he describes certain individuals? He will take a paragraph just to describe a certain individual, and always with great insight and often with humor. And it's it's a novel full of these characters, these very lively characters, and I think what he's doing in his novels, all of them, it goes for all of them, not just The Big Sleep. This is the first of his 7 novels. This was published in 1939. What he does in all of these is he creates this atmosphere that you are in another world, and we don't care so much about the plot. For one thing, because they are extraordinarily difficult to follow. And there's a reason for that as well, which we'll get into. So you're most of the time, you're pretty well lost, right? But that's not the point. The point is he's creating this very colorful world. He does it with great pace and vivid prose and what he would call, he generates the smell of fear. I've talked about the poetry, the comedy, the satire, but there are passages that are really quite, you're on the edge of your seat. He really screws up the tension quite well. And again, I can read certain excerpts from that, but that would be my response to you. Yes, he is Mr. Film Noir, before the term was coined. And he is probably the greatest literary proponent of that genre in terms of Los Angeles ever.
Yeah, and it's interesting that he starts in Los Angeles because um, I think the Hollywood version of film noir is very New York. It's very northeastern in its settings. Normally, it doesn't. I mean, they're all filmed in California, but California just doesn't lend itself to noir. It's too sunny, right? But if you've
That's why
got
he has to make it rain throughout half the book in
yeah,
The Big Sleep.
yeah, it's a neat device, and in fact, just so that the viewers understand how central the rain is, the book starts with an observation of rain. So the opening sentence is, it was about 11 o'clock in the morning, mid-October, with the sun not shining and a look of hard, wet rain in the clearness of the foothills. It's like, well, this is a California novel. Okay. All right. Let's keep going. And then later on, God, this is way into the novel. He hasn't discussed the weather since then, and then you get to page 169 in my edition at 7. I think that was 7 p.m. At 7, the rain had stopped for a breathing spell, but the gutters were still flooded. On Santa Monica, that means Santa Monica Boulevard, on Santa Monica, the water was level with the sidewalk, and a thin film of it washed over the top of the curbing. A traffic cop in shining black rubber, from boots to cap, sloshed through the flood on his way from the shelter of a sodden awning. These are not
Yeah.
images you expect in
Yeah.
California.
No, but as you and I both know, there are certain times of the year, not quite October, I wouldn't say, but maybe starting November and into December and through March,
March,
it
yeah,
rains a
definitely
lot.
March.
It
Yeah,
rains a lot, and
yeah,
it's a real problem sometimes. It can rain for days on end, folks.
yeah.
And I remember one time when I was a kid, it rained for so long they kept us out of school because of the flooding, and you couldn't get to school too easily. It rained for like a week in my memory, and then that has all the accompanying catastrophes that go along with it, not only flooding but mudslides, and the rest. So yeah, this is not a California that is strange to me, nor was it strange to you, but it is sort of humorous that he would begin this this great California/LA novel
Yeah, yeah. I
with
mean, I'd say
rain.
I agree with you. It's part of living in California. You're going to get these big rainstorms, but it's not modal, and it's
Yeah,
not modal living there. But it is modal for this particular novel, which I just think is it's kind of funny because it's sort of sticking it to California, sticking it to the cliche about California to some extent. But it's necessary to maybe make the novel work the way that you know people slink away, the darkness of the weather helps to make realistic the way people slink about and hide in the bushes and stuff like that. And I was going to say, my experience of the worst rain I ever had was actually at Christmas. So this was the end of December. I was in San Diego, and I don't know if these storms were called um, atmospheric rivers. They were called atmospheric rivers by the time I was living there. Maybe that was a term that was sort of invented by the weathermen to try to explain these long periods of just heavy rain. It just didn't stop. It could go on for a week, and everything gets flooded because the drainage system isn't. You know, the storm channels get blocked with garbage and stuff, and homeless people building shelters in the storm channels and stuff like that. So you do tend to get flooding. And I was there for a Christmas. I had elected to be in San Diego. What could be better to spend Christmas in San Diego? I go running on the beach,
Yeah.
and there was none of that. There was none of that. It was just,
Yeah.
what are we going to do indoors today?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it opens almost more like a Sherlock Holmes story, with the rain and the darkness and the gray on the horizon, this kind of thing. But maybe at this point we should say that Chandler is half British. He was born in Nebraska, or excuse me, Chicago. He grew up in Nebraska when he was a young boy. Then his mother, who was Irish, she, after splitting from his father, who apparently was a kind of a no good drunk, she took him back to Ireland, Waterford, and then from there they went to London. And then he, as a young boy, he was sent to a public school, Dulwich College, where he says he got his Greek and Latin. And we can go into that a little bit if you like, but that just in passing, that his formative years were spent in London and outskirts, and in England more broadly. And he only went back to Los Angeles in 1913. He was born in 1888 when he was in his mid-20s. So his acculturation was effectively British. Just want to say that it's important
Yeah.
that we get that in. It has something to do with the way he writes and the way he thinks. And you alluded to it earlier with this double vision he brings to it, not being from California or Los Angeles. And it's particularly acute, this double vision, because he's effectively a European
Yeah.
through his
And,
formative
and,
years.
and
Yeah,
yeah, I mean, I'm just going to add to his acculturation as British. He chose to leave California at the opening of the First World War. He chose to leave California, go back to Britain, and enlist in the British military. Presumably, he
right.
could have enlisted in the American military, but he chose the British military.
Okay.
At the beginning of the war, he could have rode out the war until 1917, when America came into the war. So he could have rode out the war, but he went back to Britain. He served, and before that, he was educated. Uh, Most of his education was in Britain, and he chose to try out for the civil service too. So again, he was making choices. He's making professional choices, military choices to serve Britain rather than the United States. I think later in life, my sense is that he felt more American. He certainly made California his permanent home, even through even after the high. He had a business high, right? And then in the 1930s, um, he lost a job. I think he was fired from a job, and then he turned to novel writing quite late in life as a way to make ends meet. And that darkness, that bitterness, I think, comes out in those novels in the 1930s. This novel is set in the 1930s, so I think he's channeling some of his own disappointments. And it's interesting you mentioned his father. I hadn't realized that his father might be a model for some of the dark characters in these novels. That's interesting too.
Yes, he was effectively a mama's boy. I can put it that way. I don't mean to put it that way so pejoratively, but he was raised by his mother, and he again, or not again, but for the first time. our listeners, he lived with his mother in Los Angeles. He brought her with him, and they lived together for quite a while. So he enlisted in, I think it was the Canadian, part of the British Empire. He enlisted in the Canadian Air Force, I think, originally. But I don't. But anyway, he was in the trenches. You're right. Yeah, and he was when he came back. He lived with his mother up until about 1923, 24, when he married a woman named Sissy Pascal, who was 17 years his senior. So this is interesting. And maybe that's why I say mama's boy. I mean, maybe he married his mother. He needed a mother figure. I don't know. But it seems very odd because at that stage he was only in his mid 30s and he married a woman who was over 50. And yeah, his personal life and his certain quirks and idiosyncrasies are a discussion in and of themselves. But yeah, I guess that's just a little background on Mr.
Yeah,
Chandler himself.
well, well, yeah. I mean, we could develop that because it may affect the way he portrays women. I mean, as I mentioned earlier, his portrayal of women is very in keeping with all the great California novels we discussed so far. Women are vamps, or they are prostitutes. That in this novel, they are vamps and they are promiscuous. They're sexually promiscuous and a bit crazy. They're crazy, or
Yeah,
they're
that's an
in bed,
understatement.
literally in bed with criminals, and one of them is a criminal. She's a murderess. So I don't. If he's a mummy's boy, you would expect him to be uh, sort of portraying matriarchs who are good and maybe they're dominating, but they're holding things together. Right? There isn't a matriarch in this novel, which I find curious given that background.
There's a matriarch or two in his later novels, but here we have a patriarch, and that
Yeah.
is General Sternwood, which is an interesting name, Sternwood, and he is a rather stern character. This is how the novel opens, right? Marlowe gets a call from a very rich household. He says he's calling on $4 million in the first paragraph, and he's there to see General Sternwood, who is an old, dying man, and he wants to see Marlowe, who has been recommended to him by an assistant of the district attorney, Bernie Oles, I think is his name. Marlowe shows up. They have this famous, if you've maybe seen the movie The Big Sleep, it's true to the novel in many respects and also not true to it in an equal number of respects. He meets with this old gentleman, General Sternwood. He is in his wheelchair in a greenhouse with all these orchids and everything, and it's hot as hell. What Mr. Sternwood wants from Marlowe is to take a blackmailer off his back. He has gotten 3 promissory notes, $1,000 each, signed by his youngest daughter, Carmen Sternwood. She has got herself involved with this fellow named Arthur Geiger, and Geiger has sent Mr. Sternwood these promissory notes saying, I suspect you would like to pay these, sir. Thank you very much. Well, again, Sternwood doesn't want to pay these things. They're not his debts. He feels that this is sort of maybe a cat's paw or something to, take him for even more money later. And he wants Marlowe to take this Geiger guy off his back. At the same time, and this does bear mentioning, we get into a discussion about this fellow named Rusty Reagan. He's an Irishman. He was in the time of troubles. 1922, he was some big shot there with the rebels. He made his way off to America. He married then the older Sternwood daughter. Her name is Vivian Sternwood, and he has just at some point picked up and left, or at least disappeared about a month ago. And General Sternwood, he really liked this Rusty guy, right? And they would sit in the greenhouse, and Rusty would, drink, just glass after glass of whatever, and tell him stories about the troubles and the Irish Rebellion. And he took a liking to this Rusty fellow. This is mentioned because this is mentioned by the author. This is put into the scene by the author, Raymond Chandler, very early, because this is actually at the center of the story, in my view. This old man's longing for this lost companionship he had with this Rusty Reagan, right? And it's a mystery as to his disappearance, and that disappearance is at the heart of the broader mystery of who this Geiger is, what he's got on Carmen with these promissory notes, and it's the key to its solution. But it's the emotional heart of the novel, I think. This relationship between General Sternwood and Rusty Reagan, and how he wants, actually, without actually specifically asking Marlowe, he wants Marlowe to find Rusty.
Yeah. And I think, if I may, I think that first chapter sets up a very clever structural, uh, a structure in the sense of multi-layered mysteries, because superficially the meeting is about these apparent blackmail notes, or these demands for repayment of his daughter's, General Sternwood's daughter's, debts. So it sounds pretty trivial, like why would you build a novel around that? But then that same chapter foreshadows this mystery of Rusty Reagan's disappearance. Like, why did he disappear? And it keeps getting foreshadowed because everybody who meets Philip Marlowe
Right.
says, so isn't this really about Rusty Reagan's
Right.
disappearance? And he's
Right.
like, no, I wasn't asked to. I wasn't asked to go find Rusty Reagan. I was just asked to deal with this debt, right? And then gradually you realize they're interconnected, right? So
Yeah.
this is not much of a spoiler alert, viewers, but there is a disappearance, and it is interconnected, and it gets complex. There are so many layers to this, and in fact, I mean, there are. I've got so many dimensions I can admire in this novel. Chandler really balanced that trade-off between complexity and impenetrability, or you just lose the reader. He manages to make this unusually complex, at least particularly for a novel that would be published today. I would bet most agents, if they received this novel today, would say, this is far too complex for our readers. Please simplify it. But Chandler has a knack for keeping you going. So it's the way Marlowe jumps from this event that leads him to go to this event, and he learns something, and then he goes to this event, he learns some more, and the plot comes together. That is masterful. And the other masterful thing I wanted to mention, and then I'll shut up, is that it circles back to your point about his descriptions of things such as the architecture, the room, the person. Now, again, agents today who receive that novel would probably say to Raymond Chandler, you've got to cut down the descriptions. People don't read descriptions anymore. They read dialogue. It's
Yeah.
too wordy. It's too descriptive. But for me, Chandler gets that balance just right. He gives you these little details. These details are so key. They're so observant. They're so sharp that you get a lot of impression about the person from, like, the way Vivian crosses her legs and shows too much leg, and then the room is ridiculously white, as if she's overcompensating for something. The luxury of the carpet, it's too deep. He's criticizing the room. Is the carpet goes wall to wall. It's ridiculously deep. It looks like a fresh snowfall. He by making these observations, he's actually giving you a lot of clues very rapidly about the situation, the people, their tastes, their psychology. But it's a balancing act. You and I know this. It's a balancing act. You don't want to describe too much because the reader gets bored, but you want to give them a little bit of indication about what that person is. You can't just have a blank person just walks in and you can't just give them nothing that can help them imagine the scene. So anyway, I'll cut that off. I'll cut my comments at that point. I just thought those two things were really masterful here.
Yeah, you're addressing something very important to Chandler himself. He started out in the pulps. He started writing short stories after he was fired from his job. He was an oil executive, making some good money. We don't know why he was fired. He was fired in 1932, at the beginning of the Depression, maybe because of alcoholism. It's unclear, but who knows?
Knowing his plots, maybe he banged the boss's daughter or wife or something. I mean, we have
Well,
we
Bruce,
have a subplot here where somebody runs off with a wife in this first novel. So maybe that was him.
Bruce, you're a very astute reader, and I assume you haven't read too much of his biography, but that could well be the case because he did have flings, he did have office affairs, yes, even after having married his mother. Well, that's what you do when you marry your mother. And so he may not have been totally guiltless in this firing. At any rate, he had always wanted to be a writer, and he had fiddled around with writing as a young man. He had written a sort of Arthurian romance poetry, kind of corny, not the greatest stuff if you read it. But he had published a few pieces, and he did have, he did dabble in writing early on. And so now he felt, well, if I ever have an opportunity, now is it to give it a shot. And he started reading these pulp detective magazines, chiefly Black Mask. And he thought, this is pretty good stuff. This has some real bite to it. I think Dashiell Hammett wasn't writing anymore for Black Mask. He had become famous. He was out in Hollywood at that point, in the early 30s. But Dashiell Hammett had also served his writing apprenticeship with Black Mask. And now Chandler felt, I could probably do this too. This seems like a fun thing. And he started writing for Black Mask, and his stories were very good. In fact, just a sidebar, what he did for his first four novels, and this being the first, The Big Sleep, 1939, he did what he called cannibalizing of his short stories. He always said he was terrible with plots. I can identify with that. And so he was looking for a plot for his first novel. He said, well, I think I'll take this from Killer in the Rain. It was the title of one of the short stories, Killer in the Rain, right? The other was The Curtain. And then he took passages from a couple other short stories that he had published previously at Black Mask. This, another sidebar, is one of the reasons why the plots are so complex. He's mixing and matching and trying to justify scenes, right? Which can make for, as you say, a really real nice balance for the reader, because you're lost, but you're also surprised, because he was probably surprising himself by some of the plot twists he came up with just to justify the damn scene he wrote 4 years ago, right? Because they thought was just too vital and alive to discard. So he served his apprenticeship in Black Mask, writing all these short stories. And I have forgotten the point I was trying to make. One sidebar too many, Bruce. Can you help me back? I feel like I'm in the middle of a Raymond Chandler plot. I've lost my way.
Yeah. So I'm gonna give a little anecdote while you think about that.
I'll
Um,
try. Yeah.
one often told story about how he lost his own plot in this novel is that there is no killer for the chauffeur, Owen. So just to give some backstory, dear viewers, Owen does kill a man. He actually kills Geiger to give something away there. But then Owen in turn is killed, and it's made to look like an accident. He is knocked on the head, and then he's at the wheel of a car which drives into the ocean. And it's funny. It becomes funnier because when the first movie was made, the directors, writers, producers contacted, I can't remember which one it was, contacted Raymond Chandler and says, hang on, who killed Owen? And Raymond Chandler says, I've got no idea.
And the thing is, after reading it 5 or 6 times, you can't even you can't even really conjecture in a very firm way what did happen to him. Was it
Well, I tell you what,
suicide?
I made an assumption. When I read this the first time, I made an assumption it was Geiger's lover, who is capable of killing because he does kill Joe Brody. So I just presumed, there's a motive. Owen was seen at the on the night at the in the room where Geiger was killed, and there is a period of the novel where Marlowe assumes it must be Owen, or is it that? Oh, I should rephrase that. Owen is the only suspect at that point, other than Vivian. Oh, sorry, Carmen, who is also in the room. But so I'm presuming. Well, later on, we are introduced to Geiger's lover at the point where he shoots Joe Brody, and for me it was like, oh, he must have killed Owen. So he must have thought Owen was killer of Geiger, and then when he worked out it wasn't Owen, I was going to kill Joe Brody, which was also a mistaken killing. Both neither of those people actually killed Geiger. So that was my assumption. You can tell me what in the novel makes that a bad assumption.
I think what makes it a bad assumption, and usually your assumptions are very astute, Bruce, but I think that what makes that bad is how do you kill a guy by driving his car off the end of a pier? Because that's where Owen Taylor ends. I mean, what do? You set it all up, and then you just put his foot on the accelerator with
Uh,
a weight on top, and then he drives off the
yeah,
end of the pier by himself. I mean, how
yeah.
does he
Well, it's
do
quite a cliche in Hollywood, isn't it? Because you often fake suicides in Hollywood movies by putting somebody behind the wheel of a car and putting a brick on the accelerator and letting it go. That
They
that
found no
often
brick.
happens.
They found no brick.
No, they
I
they
mean,
didn't find any brick, but let me point this out. The police are not very good police in this novel, and we've seen that before in Great
yeah,
California novels. The police are
yeah,
corrupt and they're disinterested in investigating certain murders.
right. This one they closed the lid on. Right, done.
There's actually a cover up, right? I mean, we should discuss how awful the criminal justice system and law enforcement is portrayed here. They cover it up. And in collusion. Philip Marlowe is in collusion on this because he doesn't want to draw attention to the Sternwoods, who are his clients. That's the way he frames it. I'd rather keep out the Sternwoods, if I may. And the police conspire in the cover up because Philip Marlowe says Philip Marlowe essentially blackmails the police. This is the scene in the district attorney's office. So there's a captain, somebody or other, and the district attorney. So these are senior people who are colluding in this. Philip Marlowe blackmails them by saying, "Look, I I didn't report the murder when I should have done, but I could report now that Geiger was running an illegal pornography distribution business, and surely the police knew about it and they turned a blind eye. Or you could help me cover up the Stonewood's involvement in all this."
Right. Yeah, he beats them at their own game. Yeah, the cops are giving maybe a little more story content. The cops are apparently right out on Hollywood Boulevard are giving negative protection to this pornographer, and it's under the guise this pornographic lending library. It's under the guise of rare books, right? There's a couple funny scenes where Marlowe goes in there, pretends he's kind of a feat. I'm looking for Ben-Hur, 1960, the one with the erratum on page 62, and Yeah, the woman who is that knows nothing at all about rare books. She smells something rotten here. But anyway, that just to maybe help explicate that thing. I think maybe it's time that we read a little bit of Chandler. Just to give
Go
people a
for it.
sense of his prose
Yeah,
style. And
go for it.
here is where he is, where Marlowe has gone in to speak with Captain Gregory of the Missing Persons Bureau because of this Rusty Reagan angle, right? Does this Gregory guy know anything about Rusty Reagan? What happened to him? Okay. At one point, Gregory holds forth about the legal system, not only in LA, which we can talk about in the 30s, it was something else, but in America at large. And I would argue that Chandler is very Shakespearean in the way that he allows people to soliloquize. This is sort of this is realism, I would argue that, but it's romantic realism, right? It's high flown poetic diction at times, even if it's kind of like street diction, but nonetheless elevated. And here is this fellow Captain Gregory of the Missing Persons Bureau holding forth. I'm a copper, he said, just a plain ordinary copper, reasonably honest as you could expect a man to be in a world where it's out of style. That's mainly why I asked you to come in this morning. I'd like you to believe that. Being a copper, I'd like to see the law win. I'd like to see the flashy, well-dressed mugs like Eddie Mars spoiling their manicures in the rock quarry at Folsom, alongside of the poor little slum-bred hard guys that got knocked over on their first caper and never had a break since. That's what I'd like. You and me both lived too long to think I'm likely to see it happen. Not in this town, not in any town half this size, in any part of this wide, green, and beautiful USA. We just don't run our country that way. So there's a condemnation of the U.S. Legal system there.
Yeah.
And yeah, what
No,
what I can get back. Go
yeah,
ahead.
I didn't mean to cut you off. Finish, please, Kevin. I'm sorry.
Oh, well, all I want, if you had a comment on that, go right ahead, because I did want to finish off my thought of 5 minutes ago. I finally picked up the thread here.
How should we do this? I don't want you to lose that thread again. So I'm
I
inclined to
got it.
say finish that thread, and then we'll come back to crime because I got notes on it.
Okay. The point I wanted to make with all this black mask stuff that Chandler was doing in the 30s, where he was serving his writing apprenticeship, is that he had always been trying to push the boundaries of the form. He had always been trying to bring in those long, very evocative descriptions of houses, of furnishings, of characters, without slowing the pace, and also to get little jokes in, wry little humor here and there. But the editor of Black Mask, he was a fellow by the name of his name escapes me, but he was very strict on this, and he wouldn't allow Chandler his little poetic digressions and whatnot. So when he finally got the chance to write a novel, he went wild with it. And to the novel's own advantage, I would argue. That's why it's a classic. If he had pruned it the way that his editor at Black Mask had always insisted, he would have just been a retread Dashiell Hammett. And I must say, I like Hammett because he was the first guy to do this sort of fiction. That is to say, he, as Chandler once wrote in a little essay of his in 1944 for the Atlantic Monthly, it was called "The Simple Art of Murder." Hammett took murder out of the Venetian vase and he dropped it into the alley where it belongs, right? So none of this Lord Peter Wimsey and Philo Vance and even Sherlock Holmes deductive sort of reasoning school of of detection. No, you get out there and you mix it up with the bad guys, and you might get conked on the head once or twice. Your life might be threatened with a gun, but that's how you solve crime, at least in America. And so he would have just, in my view, have been a retread Dashiell Hammett had you not had all these various elements that I mentioned earlier that have now come to have now blossomed in The Big Sleep. And I just want to say one last thing, another passage I wanted to read just to show you how he does this. Again, as you mentioned, Bruce, this walking this fine line between too much description, but not enough to really evoke a character or an atmosphere. And there's one, we were talking about Brody earlier, who is he's a grifter drifter, as I term them, and there are many of them in this novel. And here is how Marlowe describes Brody on first meeting. The man was long-legged, long-waisted, high-shouldered, and he had dark brown eyes and a brown, expressionless face that had learned to control its expressions long ago. Hair like steel wool grew far back on his head and gave him a great deal of domed brown forehead that might, at a careless glance, have seemed a dwelling place for brains. That's it. Get a little joke in there. You got the guy. You got a good mental image of him. That's the point of descriptions of any sort, that you, the reader, are able to develop a clear mental image of the thing being described.
Yeah, well said, sir. Let's talk about his style, Sam. I mean, I think we should point out to the viewers that this style is really hard. It's really difficult, hard in the sense of difficult, to get the balance right, because it can easily degenerate into farce or just a cliche. And in fact, I would say you can correct me if you think otherwise, but most of what uh, Chandler was reading, and then most of the publications in which he was publishing his short stories, most of the stuff in there is crap. I mean, it's very generic. I mean, I used to collect some of these magazines, like the pulp fiction magazines, because they're beautifully illustrated and they're very evocative of the era, and some of them are very Art Deco. And as you know, I like Art Deco. But the stories inside were just awful, and I say awful. They're I mean, they're cliched. They're very generic. The stories are generic. The language is hard biting, but it doesn't give you a sense of authenticity. It's far too exaggerated. And Marlowe's skill, I'm sorry, Chandler's skill is in he takes the compelling parts of Pulp Fiction, which is the pace and the darkness, the you know the vice. Vice is always fascinating. I mean, detective novels, mystery novels, are fascinating because they're rare, right? They're not things that most people have any direct experience of, or they wish they didn't, but they're still fascinated because they're so consequential. So Chandler runs with that, and he also runs with this exaggerated dialogue. In my opinion, I think it's exaggerated. I cannot imagine that everybody was as cynical, as aggressive, as as rude and libacious and vicious as he makes them in his novels. But his skill is in creating situations that help to make that these behaviors, uh, these language stylings, make them sort of credible. So, for instance, Marlowe, he is cynical. He's not earning enough money. He's somewhat careless, even with his own life. Like, he keeps getting into situations where people are pulling guns on him, and he just keeps making wisecracks. He keeps, he keeps saying, "Oh God, not another guy with a gun. Where are your brains? And I'm reading that, and if my realistic brain is running, I'm thinking you're going to get yourself shot. Shut up, calm the situation down, try to form empathy, all the things that you are taught in crisis negotiation. Try to relate, try to add value. But Marlowe doesn't do any of that. He just keeps the cynicism going. But my point was that Chandler creates reasons that okay, he can get away with this. And the rain, as I mentioned earlier, the rain and the having activities at night helps people to hide and to escape and to be indiscernible, or to mistake who they're shooting. So they shoot the wrong people. They mistake who has shot their friends. Chandler's. You get the idea. He's thinking. He's mindful of credibility, even as he still pushes the envelope of pace and complexity and this what would you call it, this exaggerated culture of vice. He pushes it because it's fascinating, it's pacey, it's engaging, but he just adds these contexts that help you to think, oh, okay, in that situation, okay, I can imagine that happening.
He had a very ambivalent relationship to the crime fiction genre, and you can tell, as you mentioned, he takes shots at the genre itself from the very
Yeah.
beginning, and in and on through all his books. And if I may briefly, because it's priceless in my view, and it illustrates exactly what you're saying about how he spoofs the form often. If we can just go ahead a few novels in the future to one called The Lady in the Lake. And this is a short passage, and I'd like you to listen to this, and you'll see what I'm talking about. Uh, and he's in a confrontation, Mr. Marlowe. Marlowe is the hero of all Chandler's detective fiction, all 7 of his novels. So we have Marlowe. He's face to face with a woman who pulls a gun on him. Okay. You wondered why I gave you the empty gun. She gives him an empty gun for whatever reason. Anyway, he has an empty gun. She pulls a gun on him. Why not? I had another one in my bag like this. Her right hand came up from her coat pocket and she pointed it at me. Marlowe is always the first person narrator as well. I grinned. It may not have been the heartiest grin in the world, but it was a grin. I've never liked this scene, I said. Detective confronts murderer. Murderer produces gun. Points same at detective. Murderer tells detective the whole sad story with the idea of shooting him at the end of it, thus wasting a lot of valuable time, even if in the end, murderer did shoot detective. Only murderer never does. Something always happens to prevent it. The gods don't like this scene either. They always manage to spoil it. But this time, she said softly, and got up and moved towards me softly across the carpet. Suppose we make it a little different. Suppose I don't tell you anything, and nothing happens, and I do shoot you. I still wouldn't like the scene, I said. So this is Chandler burlesquing the form. He got very impatient with it. Even from his very beginnings with Black Mask, he was trying to push that envelope, as you say. And he's doing it with great relish and glee in his novels, because now he can cut loose. He's got an editor that will indulge him, the Knopfs, right? It's Knopf Publishing. And he does this quite a bit. And so that's what you're sensing, where Marlowe is putting himself in crazy situations and he's joking it off, and he's got a smile and a wisecrack on his lips. That's Chandler and his impatience with the form, but it's also Chandler's supreme wit. I mean, I think the guy is hard to beat. And if I can just segue from that into, he's the master of the simile. I have never run across anyone who uses similes, at least in the American vernacular, with such precision. And what I mean by that is you're creating an image, a mental image, but once removed from the thing you're talking about. So you can see it with fresh eyes, the purpose of a simile, right? And he does it with great wit too. Just a couple of examples. I wrote some down so I wouldn't have to page through the book. It's right off the top in the book when he goes to see this General Sternwood. A few locks of dry white hair clung to his scalp like wildflowers fighting for life on a bare rock. And then he goes on to describe more. The general spoke again slowly, using his strength as carefully as an out-of-work showgirl uses her last good pair of stockings. They go on and on. You could do this one. Her black hair was glossy under a brown Robin Hood hat that might have cost $50 and looked as if you could have made it with one hand out of a desk blotter. He wore a blue uniform coat that fitted him the way a stall fits a horse. She was in oyster white lounging pajamas, trimmed with white fur, cut as flowingly as a summer sea frothing on the beach of some small and exclusive island. And then he gets self-reflexive and self-ironic with stuff like, it was a smooth, silvery voice that had a tiny tinkle in it, like bells in a doll's house. I thought that was silly as soon as I thought of it. So there's Mr. Chandler and his whole writing style, sort of in a nutshell, with those similes, right?
Yeah.
He has great precision in terms of his descriptions. You get a clear mental image, but there's also wit and there's self-irony on
Yeah.
top of it.
Yeah, so I'm going to make a point about similes because you and I know we often hear from writers and editors who say, "Do not use similes. You should not do them because they never work." I've heard writers say that they never work. They're always they always just break the flow, and inherently similes can never be like the thing you're talking about as you think they are. So don't do them at all. But Chandler does them usefully or purposefully. So purposefully. So
Yes.
sometimes in a non-comic way, they're not meant to be comic. They actually add meaning. So the way that man's hair falls reminds the viewer, channeled through uh, Mr. Marlowe, reminds Mr. Marlowe of something which helps you imagine what he's looking at. So the similes are so well chosen that they are evocative in a useful way that helps you to imagine what's going on. So it's just descriptively useful. And then at other times they're comic. So they're really wisecracks. They're wisecracks between Marlowe and you, the reader. They're not said. So he's saying wisecracks to wind up the criminals or probably make himself feel a bit more confident in these dire situations. But he's also sharing these with the reader, so it's kind of personal. So it takes you inside Marlowe. You're actually it becomes almost first person, this novel at times, and Marlowe is your hero, but he's actually also your avatar at times. So I wanted to make that point. It reminds me of P.G. Wodehouse, who also was a master of similes. There's similes all the time, similes, and mostly they're comic. They're really, really funny. She's like a battleship at anchor and stuff like that. They're just that. Yes,
Yeah.
yes, it
Yes.
works. And they're very Shakespearean. So Shakespeare used a lot of similes, and they entered our vernacular because they're so good. So yes, I totally agree with you. I had written down some quotes myself, which I think circle back to the styling, this noir styling, the cynicism, and also the stoicism of Marlowe. So there's a few comments early on in the first chapter where, because this is the first novel, this is where we're being introduced to Marlowe for the first time, and we need to know who Marlowe is. So we need to get a sense of the wisecracking, cynical, lonely, poor. He claims to be poor, and disaffected ex copper who's now a private detective, and it doesn't pay well. Why the hell am I doing it? Sort of thing. So the General Sternwood the first comment about Marlowe from a third party comes from General Stewart. He says, I haven't noticed that you suffer from many inhibitions, Mr. Marlowe, right? And this is in reaction to Marlowe saying, well, in this context, he's saying, may I speak freely? But before that, Marlowe is just speaking his mind, like, do your daughters run wild? Uh, do you, do you have the money to pay it? He's saying things that would be considered rude, certainly at that time in the company of strangers. So he doesn't have many inhibitions. We get that in the first few pages. And then he goes upstairs to see Vivian, the eldest daughter, and she says, you're not much of a gusher, are you, Mr. Marlowe? And this is a I found this interesting because it's actually within 5 pages of each other. They're contradictory if you think about them. So you don't have many inhibitions, but you're not a gusher, but it's different situations. So with General Sternwood, Sternwood is um, presenting Marlowe with a problem, but Sternwood is sort of dancing around some issues, including the Rusty Regan disappearance, which seems to be it's foreshadowed as that's what General Sternwood really cares about. It's not these minor uh, blackmail amounts or debt amounts that his daughters run up. He really wants to get to Rusty Regan. So General Stone is dancing around these things, and then Marlowe is pushing him in this situation. But then he gets upstairs to see Vivian. Vivian is probing him. Says, "What were you talking about with my daddy? And did you know Rusty Regan, my husband, disappeared? Do you know why he disappeared?" There's these sorts of inferences. And at this point, Marlowe sort of clams up, and he says, your dad might have talked to me about this. That's his sort of style. So
Right.
so he is contextually awkward. You might say he's contrary, if not for the game, but for the not for if not for the fun of it, for it's for professional reasons. We learn later that he is actually very sharp. He's like sharp in an intellectual sense. He's very observant and he knows what's going on. He reads people very quickly. He reads situations very quickly, like a good copper or a good soldier should. Situational awareness, reading people, uh, understanding, whether that when they're going to jump you. Marlowe is great at this, which gets back to one of these contextual things that Chandler adds to make it credible. Why does Marlowe keep walking into dangerous situations? He actually has a lot of confidence. He actually has a lot of skill in reading people and reading situations, right? So you get the idea. Now we get onto this breaking the fourth wall thing and this self parody of the genre. So on that same page where Vivian says to him, "You're not a gusher," so she also says to him, "So you're a private detective." I didn't know they really existed except in books.
Yeah.
Or else they were greasy little men snooping around hotels, which is a reference to what were called at the time hotel detectives, were essentially security guards, but they were called hotel detectives, which is a very elevated, undeservedly elevated way of referring to them. At best, they were former coppers, as cynical and disillusioned as Marlowe. So I thought that was the first instance I thought of where he's self-parodying his own genre. And then I wanted to give these quotes where he's referencing Hollywood as an influence about how vicious people behave. So when Joe Brody pulls a gun on Marlowe, Brody says, "Neat, huh? Just kind of stand up a minute. Yeah. Come forward just about 2 yards. You might grab a little air while you're doing that." That's the end of the dialogue. And the next sentence says, "His voice was the elaborately casual voice of the tough guy in pictures. Pictures have made them all like that." So I found this fascinating because Chandler's novels are so easy to turn into noir movies. They lend themselves to noir movies. And I would say his writing is influenced by Hollywood. His writing is influenced by Hollywood. And as he's writing, he's saying Hollywood is making my characters act inauthentically. And it's not just that instance. If I may, I'll give you another one.
Yeah.
We skip way towards the end of the novel now, and this is where Marlowe gets in his most dangerous situation. He's tracking down a murderer who is involved in the disappearances and other mysteries, which I I I won't. I don't think I should give up right now. So he's on his own with two men who he knows are bad, and they're all trying to dance around their discomfort. Anyway, so there's a man in coveralls at this garage, which is actually a hideout. Marlowe knows it's a hideout. So this man in coveralls is described as he moved his dark eyes up and down slowly, and then glanced at his fingernails one by one, holding them up against the light and studying them with care, as Hollywood has taught it should be done. He spoke around a cigarette. That's such a cliche. That's a Hollywood cliche. And Dirk Bogarde epitomizes that cliche in the movie The Big Sleep.
Oh, I haven't seen that version. That's the one with Mitchum, right? That's the Mitchum
No,
version.
Robert Mitchum is the second one by Michael Winner. Michael Winner
But
in the
Dirk
70s.
oh, you
I
said
was
Dirk
referring to
Bogarde.
Dirk
Okay.
Bogart. Dirk Bogart is.
Humphrey Bogart. Humphrey Bogart.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Dirk is the British actor. Humphrey Bogart. I apologize. Humphrey Bogart.
You
Yeah.
can't make our American hero
No.
Philip Marlowe British.
No. No.
He
No.
might have a very British name, Marlowe, but
Yeah.
nonetheless, um, yes, of course. Chandler saw his Hollywood films. I'm sure that's why he could make that kind of comment. I'm sure he got a little bit of his style from the Warner Brothers gangster films, no doubt. They were all feeding off each other. Black Mask, the Pulp Fiction, Hollywood, and he took that and used it to his own purposes. It sounds like we're kind of narrowing in on what actually makes the Big Sleep, I think, and the entire series of uh, detective novels that Chandler wrote. We're narrowing in on what makes it really memorable. It's the character of Philip Marlowe. Okay, it's his voice, right? It's a very attractive voice. It's a very American voice. It has that kind of sardonic, wisecracking style, but he's also very sentimental, right? Sherlock Holmes isn't sentimental. Hercule Poirot isn't sentimental. Auguste Dupin is not sentimental. But Marlowe gets sentimental. I mean, he gets sentimental to the extent that he is willing to risk his neck just to maybe find this Rusty Reagan so this General Sternwood can have this relief in his life that he knows at least where he is, and maybe Marlowe can bring him back into his life. And he tries to help the Sternwood girl, Carmen Sternwood. I mean, he's risking life and limb for people who probably really don't give a damn about him. And this brings us now to Chandler's conception of the Marlowe character, and we get an inkling of it right at the very beginning of The Big Sleep when he goes to the Sternwood mansion, and above the entrance hall there's a stained glass window, and it's of a knight in shining armor, and he's trying to untie this damsel in distress, apparently, who is naked but with lots of convenient hair, I think is how Chandler puts it, to cover her. And
Let me
knight
read
is.
it. So it says that there was a
Go ahead.
broad stained glass panel. There was a broad stained glass panel showing a knight in dark armor rescuing a lady who was tied to a tree and didn't have any clothes on, but some very long and convenient hair.
That's right. And I think if you keep reading, it says something about, I felt like going up there to help him. He didn't seem like he was getting very far with the untying of the knots. Well, that's Marlowe. He is the knight.
Yeah.
He is the modern day chivalrous knight in an urban, gritty environment. And it doesn't take any great guesswork on my part. He says it in so many words in fact, this essay. It's a very important essay for those people who are interested in Chandler. The Simple Art of Murder, again, published 1944 in the Atlantic. And he says at one point, he says, in everything that can be called art, there is a quality of redemption. It may be pure tragedy, if it is high tragedy, and it may be pity and irony, and it may be the raucous laughter of the strong man. But down these mean streets a man must go who is not himself mean, who is neither tarnished nor afraid. The detective in this kind of story must be such a man. He is the hero. He is everything. So Mr. Chandler is putting all his chips on this Marlowe character, and this is his modern day chivalrous knight errant, which brings us to another point, that in his movement, Marlowe is a knight errant, and you couldn't put him in a better city for that function than Los Angeles. You've got to have a car in Los Angeles to get around, particularly then. They didn't have anything. Well, I guess they had little red cars, but those were abolished soon later. You had to have a car. So in a horizontal fashion, he's roving, he's errant, he's moving from this place to the next, but also in a vertical fashion. He's going through all echelons of society. This is what a detective does. And that's why I argue whenever I get a chance to talk about Chandler, and because this is my background, my training, I think he's a great social historian as well. And he's got the perfect vehicle for that in Marlowe, his latter-day knight. Just wanted to say a couple things on that point about Marlowe. I think he is absolutely critical. And Chandler says it himself, the hero is everything, at least in his fiction.
Yeah. I think you're quite right. So I hadn't pictured him as a knight, but I think you're right. So what the things I can add to his character in that direction are that I observe that he is poor because he turns down money on his own ethical compass. So he could exploit the Sternwoods. He's offered whatever money he needs to do various tasks, including finding Rusty Reagan, and he turns down this money. He complains about $25 a day plus gasoline, but he sets that price, and there's various points where he could he could certainly sell information. He could blackmail with the information he picks up, like the ledger of clients, Geiger's clients who are taking this pornography. But he poses as somebody who is interested in exploiting that ledger in order to get other information, not actually to exploit it. So he's pretending to be an exploiter, and he's making all these choices which are not to his material advantage. There are also, I should say, he is rewarded. So he is rewarded for his virtue. For instance, Vivian ends up paying him for the evidence he has of her crime, which we won't divulge. The Sternwoods are involved in crime, not the organized crime which appears to dominate the early part of the novel. Marlowe covers that up. So there's another cover up there. So he colludes with the police in covering up the Sternwoods' involvement with Geiger's killing. They didn't do the killing, but one of them was there, and then, I don't want to give too much away. Then later on, we learn that they were involved in other crimes, and he covers them up. So he's covering them up, and it's not his initial intent is not to make money, is not to be rewarded. He just has this strange ethical thing about client. I'm trying to protect my client. That's what he keeps saying, even though he's barely met these clients and they don't seem to be nice people. He's very cynical about them. But he has this moral compass, which I think is a deliberate device of for by Chandler to try to make credible some of the choices that Marlowe is making. So Marlowe is prepared to risk his neck, not just for this meager paycheck, but also to reward his own sense of virtue, his own chivalrous or chivalry. Sorry, chivalry as you've identified it. So it makes his behavior credible. It also helps us to relate to him because he without that it'd be difficult to sympathize with him because you could think of him as self-destructive without that virtuous side. You could think of him also as quite tedious. All that all those witticisms and self-deprecation, it might grate on you eventually, unless you thought, oh, he's actually a good guy. It's coming from a good place. He's not just a terrible old bore who's just railing against the world that let him down. So it really helps you to empathize with him and have him as your avatar.
Yeah. Also, uh, for those of you who are interested, Chandler wrote great letters, and they have come out in a volume if you want to read his epistolary prose, just as exciting as his novels. And in one of these letters, he says that he has really put Marlowe in a false position because a man like him, with all these virtues, and he's brave, he's witty, he's smart, he's humanitarian, he would not be a PI. He would be doing something a little bit more elevated, or if not that, at least something not as slimy. Because as Vivian Sternwood, whom you quoted, says correctly, they're basically hotel detectives, slimy little men snooping around slimy little places. Those are Chandler's thoughts, right? But he says explicitly in this letter, I put him in a false position. So, you know, uh, he's in that insofar he's not an authentic character, but he's a character of Chandler's own yearnings and longings, and perhaps the man he wanted to be. I
Yeah.
can imagine.
So I might dispute Chandler on this because the way you could interpret Marlowe's position in life as credible is that actually his virtues don't help him. Like he was a copper in a corrupt police force. He says, I'm going to get the quote because he
Yeah,
actually he says, I know what
he was
it's
in the
like.
DA's office. Yeah,
Yeah, he's in the DA's office and he's talking about the cover up and he says, as for the cover up, I've been in police business myself, as you know. They come a dime a dozen in any big city, meaning the cover ups. Cops get very large and emphatic when an outsider tried to hide anything, but they do the same things themselves every other day to oblige their friends or anybody with a little pull. And this speaks to a Marlowe who presumably didn't engage in that. He didn't advance his career by engaging in the vicious side of police opportunism, and it's held him back. And then you get explicitly in the novel, in the chronology of his behavior as a private investigator, he's holding himself back materially. He's choosing things which are not to his advantage materially. So I would actually say to Chandler, look, Marlowe's low position actually makes sense. He's holding himself back, and a lot of people can relate to this, where the virtuous people don't get ahead, the vicious people do get ahead. Now, just I think we can all admit that's a slippery attitude to take because it could be narcissistic. You just end up blaming the world, that the world's against you. It's not my fault. My station is not my fault, right? But there is some truth to saying the virtuous don't get ahead, or the virtuous certainly, this is where we can all agree, the virtuous certainly will turn down some opportunities because they don't like the ethics of it, and other people, more vicious people, will choose those opportunities, and they might get ahead. They might get ahead professionally, romantically, in business, whatever it is. So I actually would dispute Chandler's conception
Yeah.
of Marlowe as conveniently, as contrived. His position is contrived. I actually found
Yeah.
it realistic.
Yeah. Um, what can I say to that? I think I think I think that Chandler might reply to you. He would say something along the lines of, "Well, yes, okay, all the above is true, but you you don't know the town I'm talking about, okay? Because in the 1930s, LA was pretty corrupt. I'll just give a couple examples. The mayor for many years running, his name was Frank Shaw. He was recalled in 1938. He was the first mayor of a major American city to ever be recalled. Okay, his chief of police was a fellow by the name of Two Gun Davis. That that says it all. All right, and the DA at the time was a fellow named Buron Fitz. He was there from 1928 to 1940, and he was in tight with the Hollywood studios, and he would be the fixer if some star got into trouble. You know, they got drunk behind the wheel, and then they are on a manslaughter charge. Well, he would quietly get them off, right? That kind of thing. And in fact, this has to do with my own boy, Errol Flynn, who wrote that epic poem on him. Fitz was in office from 1928 to 1940. He finally was voted out of office and replaced by a fellow with the moniker Honest John Dockweiler. And Honest John was not, he didn't live up to his name. He was the guy behind railroading Errol Flynn into court on sort of, I would argue, trumped up double statutory rape charges. And why did he do that? It's because the Hollywood studios were backing his opponent, this Buron Fitz, in 1940, and now he was getting his revenge. So it was a very dirty city, and Chandler had seen enough of it to know what one man could or could not do under those circumstances. That's maybe an oblique way of responding to what you said, Bruce. It doesn't necessarily discount any of it, but I wanted to get that in anyway. That
Yeah.
Los Angeles was an incredibly corrupt and anti-union town, by the way. Doesn't mean that the unions aren't corrupt, but they were very Republican, very anti-union. This had been the case ever since 1910, when you had a big you had a bomb explosion in the New York and the LA Times building. You had dozens of people killed and wounded, and then all of a sudden you had the bosses, in LA getting together and saying, we got to crack down. So union activity was very limited as well. It was a rough town, and they even had one last point. They even had gambling boats offshore in Santa Monica Bay, beyond the 3 mile limit, and that was finally then they were finally dismantled, uh, that whole operation, uh, only after the Second World War in 1946. So don't let anyone tell you that Chicago and Al Capone or New York and the Five Families had anything on L.A. It was sort of institutionalized corruption. It was the old guard, holding the line against what they saw as these interlopers and other criminal interests from back east, Detroit, Chicago, Kansas City, they would come out there, and maybe that's who Eddie Mars is. He's one of these. Eddie Mars is um, the main gangster in our Big Sleep. Maybe that's where he's from. He doesn't give off an L.A. vibe. I mean, nor does his henchman uh, Lash Canino, even the name, right? He doesn't seem like he's from LA either. So at that time, one added thing, you had lots of East Coast, Midwest gangster types moving into LA. Bugsy Siegel is the most prominent example. And so LA was battling a lot in terms of criminality.
Yeah. Well, I think the viewers would be thinking of LA Confidential, the movie, which I think brilliantly depicts the sort of Los Angeles you're talking about, particularly the Hollywood you're talking about. And it has private detectives, former cops who are involved in the vice, which is very Marlowe, I think. Let's dwell on the utterly scathing commentary on law enforcement in this novel, and then indirectly or ultimately, I suppose, ultimately on America, because it's not some of the commentary is not just on California being corrupt or unfair, unjust. It's America. So I've got a good quote here. It's fairly early on in the novel. Owen has been killed in this car, and Vivian is defending him. Owen was in love with Carmen, and Vivian is defending Owen. And Marlowe points out he had a police record, and Vivian replies. So this is the next sentence. She shrugged. She she said negligently, "He didn't know the right people. That's all a police record means in this rotten, crime-ridden country." That's a comment on America, I can imagine, given the image you just gave us, I can imagine a lot of Americans thinking that, where they're getting this news of gang violence from Chicago, New York, and particularly if they're living in Los Angeles, despite all the cover-ups, they've got to know, by hearsay at least, they've got to know that Los Angeles is pretty corrupt at the same time. If you're hearing it from all over the country, and Hollywood, the noir movies are kind of adding to that cultural anchoring. You would call it psychological anchoring through the fiction as well as the non-fiction news. The fictional depictions are adding to this anchoring in an America which is run by mob bosses, and the police are in on it. You're going to feel that this is an American problem. It's not just a Californian problem. It's an American problem. So I thought that was an interesting comment from 1939, because you can imagine people saying, "That's unpatriotic, Mr. Raymond Chandler, you damned immigrant, you limey. How dare you, sir? How dare you, sir? Los Angeles may have its problems, but don't you tarnish the whole of America." You know. So I
Yeah.
thought that was quite brave. Um, and then there's some other comments here which just depict Los Angeles just terrible. So when Marlowe first meets Eddie Mars, he says, "I know you, Mr. Mars, the Cypress Club at Las Olindas," right, which is a gambling establishment as well as a nightclub. "Flash gambling for flash people, the local law in your pocket, and a well-greased line into LA. In other words, protection." And it's not just Eddie Mars's nightclub; it's the damn porno, the collectible antique bookstore. That's the pretense that is actually distributing pornography. And Marlowe says, I think he's talking to the district. No, he's actually talking to Joe Brody and his girlfriend. He says, "Everybody knows the racket exists. Hollywood's made to order for it. If a thing like that has to exist, then right out on the street is where all practical coppers want it to exist, for the same reason they favor red light districts. They know where to flush the game out when they want to." So he speaks to the self-interest of this collusion between police and criminals. And so that's with Joe Brody. And then we get to the district attorney's office. I thought this was a subtle comment, which I think it would be easy to skip over. This is Wilde speaking. So Wilde is the district attorney. He says, "Sit down, Marlowe. I'll try to handle Captain Kronjaeger, but you know how it is. This is a big city now." And you get, that big city implication is it's it's big boy rules, as they say in the intelligence community. Big boy rules means we're going to break rules, we're going to do vicious things. That's not a side of intelligence which I like, and actually I resent people using that phrase. I think it's always a bad sign when people use that phrase, big boy rules. But this implication, it's a big city now. You know, you gotta you gotta accept the vice that comes with growth, you know. And there's going to be multiple players. There's a sort of balance of power between multiple, jurisdictions, uh, sheriff's offices, um, metropolitan police forces, uh, maybe some feds. We don't actually have any feds in this novel. It's all very local, and that's a bad sign, right? Because the feds are supposed to. They're the ultimate arbiters of this sort of local corruption. Um, uh, all right, so I got one last comment for you. So this is still in the district attorney's office. So Captain Kronjaeger, he doesn't say much, right? He's just described as looking scathingly at Marlowe, um, and he ends up scolding Marlowe for not reporting Geiger's murder when it happened, which was the night before. So it's almost 24 hours before he gets into the district attorney's office. Um, and in that time, by the way, Geiger's boyfriend has shot Joe Brody. So there's been another murder, and I, Marlowe could be prosecuted for hiding information with which was pertinent to not just one homicide, but then allowed the other homicide to happen. And Kronjaeger's making that point. So Kronjaeger says Brody was living on borrowed time. His kind usually are, but a life is a life. And then Marlowe responds, right. Tell that to your coppers next time they shoot down some scared, petty larceny crook running away up an alley with a stolen spare. I think spare tire. Well, I mean, that is scathing. I mean, this is like, it reminds me of the times where I thought, Marlowe, you're going to get shot in the face when you say these things to a criminal with a gun. In this case, he's saying things to coppers that could make his life really difficult. They could, keep following around and arresting him for trumped up traffic violations. They could shut down his business. They could trump up reasons to do that. Marlowe, shut up. I'm thinking, protect yourself. You're such a chivalrous knight. You keep saying things which are just going to get you into more and more trouble and be counterproductive for your mission. But for me, these were really scathing comments from 1939 when to Hollywood, popular culture, Hollywood in particular, generally tried to portray police as the good guys. The cowboys and Indians, good guys is versus the criminals. Uh, you did have Noir, which touched on the vicious side of it, but the mode in popular culture was to celebrate America as lawful, orderly, just, and communitarian. And I thought this was brave. Help me with the other word I'm looking for.
Yeah,
Maybe
forthright would be the
yeah.
word that occurs to me. He's telling it like it is, as he has experienced it in the city, as he has read about. I mean, the thing to note here with what you're saying, Bruce, and the whole time you're speaking, I'm thinking about this. Chandler has been here since 1913. And 1913 Los Angeles is not 1939 Los Angeles. It has changed. I've said this on almost every podcast that we've done together about these Los Angeles novels. that 1913, pre-war LA, you barely even had Hollywood. 1913, December 1913, the first feature film was made in Hollywood. It's called The Squaw Man. 1913, this fateful year, is also when the water came down from the Owens Valley. Mr. Mulholland facilitated that to help the city expand and spread. And then in this year of 1913, Mr. Chandler arrives. Nice coincidence of dates. So he had been there right when the city had started to change, but was still, LA could have been 1900, 1890, basically. Just a little bit post-Western town, and uh, he had seen these developments between 1913 and the year 1950. The population of Los Angeles went from 300,000 to 2 million. So he has sort of a nostalgia, I think, that is informing this very jaundiced view of the city and its law enforcement at this point. That for one. For another, if you continue reading, and I hope you will, because you say this is your first Chandler novel. If you continue reading his next 5 novels, at least the last one takes place in San Diego, there is always this dialectic between the criminals and the cops, with Marlowe in the middle, and we're not sure who's worse, right? We're not sure who's worse. In fact, not so much in this one with Eddie Mars, but a little bit. But in the next one, Farewell, My Lovely, there's a gangster called Laird Brunette. You can sense a real admiration that Chandler has through Marlowe for this gangster, right? Vis-a-vis the cops. The Bay City cops, by the way, which is an alias for Santa Monica, and Santa Monica. So this takes place in Bay City. They have their own mayor, their own fire department, their own police force, for those of you who don't know, even if it's right in the middle of LA. So this tension between the cops on one side and the criminals on the other, Marlowe fighting this two-front war, this continues through all the 6 novels that take place in LA.
Yeah. All right. Love it, Kevin. If you would let me, I'd like to talk about women briefly, if only
Sure.
because we have talked about
Anytime.
women. Yeah, well said, sir. We have talked about women as a dimension in common across all these novels. And I've got some good illustrations of that, and maybe you can give me your own. So the first one I'm going to say is interesting is really early on when we are introduced to General Sternwood. Marlowe says, are these girls running wild? What's their background? Why are they getting into debt? Right. And Sternwood, the general, says Vivian went to good schools of the snob type and to college. Carmen went to half a dozen schools of greater and greater liberality and ended up where she started. I presume they both had and still have all the usual vices. If I sound a little sinister as a parent, Mr. Marlowe, it is because my hold on life is too short to include any Victorian hypocrisy. And I'm going to ask you, Kevin, what do you think that reminded me of? Where he said Carmen went to half a dozen schools of greater and greater liberality and ended up where she started. What novel that we've already discussed? The
I'm
parallel.
trying to think. Schools of greater and greater liberality. Well, you're not thinking of a single man, are you? And that
I'm thinking of Evelyn Waugh and The Loved
okay.
One, because remember, Evelyn Waugh made the same comment about progressive schools. So he phrased them as progressive
Ah,
schools,
yes. Yeah, yeah.
and they produced that rather empty-headed, directionless girl who often apologized for my very progressive education. Um,
Right.
you know
Now I
that
remember. Yeah.
yeah. So So girls getting progressive education. I thought that was an interesting parallel.
Right, indeed. Yeah, you had we tried to discuss it, or I tried to last when we spoke about the loved one. I wasn't able to give you an answer, yeah, about that one, and yeah, why there should have been such a progressive uh, attitude that they had inculcated in school, while at the same time, this young lady and the loved one, she had very what would be termed traditional uh,
Traditional
vi-
ambitions, yeah.
views of the male female dynamic.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I couldn't answer you. I couldn't explain why that should be the case. Why there should be this dual
Yeah.
aspect.
Yeah, and thank you for bringing that up because you could say the same thing about the Sternwood daughters because although they're very progressive in their willingness to break convention, so they're gamblers, they seduce men. They also, particularly Vivian, she has traditional views on marriage. So she's quite, uh, she longs for Rusty Reagan. She's sad that she's clearly hurt that he left her. Um, turns out for another woman, and then she sort of fixates on Marlowe as her next male interest, and she's quite dependent. She's quite gender rolled in the way she approaches men. At the same time as clearly neither daughter is gender rolled in the way they approach their vices. And in fact, Carmen is posing nude for photographs, and she's also taking drugs, narcotics. Uh, no, I've got another quote for you, and I'm gonna put you on the spot again, Kevin, and ask you what this reminds you of.
Go
Uh,
ahead.
Viv Vivian
Yeah.
says quite late in the day, she's having a tense conversation with Marlowe, and she says to him, "Don't say yeah, it's common."
Yeah. Is that common? I guess so. Call me common. And
But
your
don't say
question,
yeah. I
Bruce?
mean, we've seen in another novel we've
Yeah.
discussed, we've seen exactly uh, that statement made to a character.
Ooh, you are putting me on the spot. Let's see. It wouldn't be the loved one again, would it?
No, no,
No. Yeah. Would it be? Oh, I know who it was. I know it's our little ingenue from Day of the Locust, right? No,
no,
no.
no. It's Sammy Glick.
Help me out.
It's Sammy Glick.
Oh, it's
It's Sammy
Sammy. I
Glick.
was thinking. I was
Yeah,
thinking. I was
yeah.
thinking females. Yeah. Right.
No, because
But
yeah, because
it's
yeah,
Kit. It's Kit who tells him not to
yeah.
say yeah. Or Al Manheim. One of the two. Right.
It
Anyway.
was Mannheim
Yeah.
when Sammy Glick was still a boy messenger in the office, and
Yeah.
Sammy Glick does actually take that to heart to some extent. He tries to improve himself. Um, so so just on
Oh,
women,
oh for two.
yeah, but no, well, they're kind of uh quite nuanced questions, right? Uh they're quite minor
I,
details, but I thought it was interesting that they do they cross over the few novels we've read. So
no,
uh,
all you've succeeded in doing is making me self-conscious about saying yeah. But go ahead.
yeah, that's California, man. Yeah, totally.
Right. I say yeah
It's
every
totally
second
authentic.
sentence. I mean, you're cramping my style here.
No. But I think it sounds better in California. It's more authentic. It's more appropriate to the semantics of California than it is to the that nasal New York. Yeah, yeah. It sounds more
Thank
threatening
you.
and yeah.
Yeah.
No, it sounds
Yeah.
fine from you. And then I
Thank you.
just wanted to make a point about Carmen. Carmen is really crazy, and you eventually learn how crazy she is. When we
Hmm.
first meet her, she does something that in an in a different author's hands would come across as so ridiculous and so um counter-normative that uh, you would just it would give you a bad taste right at the beginning of the novel. So I think this is on the third page. So Marlowe walks into the Sternwood mansion, and the first Sternwood he meets is Carmen. And okay, so let me read this. She was 20 or so, small and delicately put together, but she looked durable. Her eyes were slate gray and had almost no expression when they looked at me. She came over near me and smiled with her mouth, and she had little, sharp, predatory teeth. Tall, aren't you? She said. I didn't mean to be. Her eyes rounded. She was puzzled. She was thinking. I could see, even on that short acquaintance, that thinking was always going to be a bother to her.
Yeah.
So she's not very bright, which parallels Evelyn Waugh's comments on California women, unfortunately. And then, but her next statement is handsome too, she said, and I bet you know it. And then eventually she says, you're a big tease. She put a thumb up and bit in it. It was a curiously shaped thumb, thin and narrow like an extra finger with no curve in the first joint. She bit it and sucked it slowly. And then she turns and falls back into his arms and says, you're cute. I'm cute too. So in those few paragraphs, you get the idea she's uh, very forward. She is not conventionally gender rolled. She's narcissistic. Uh, she's and predatory, at least in the metaphor of her teeth. Yeah, she's certainly sexually predatory, and we will learn worse about her too. Uh, but so tell me if I'm wrong. There are no virtuous women in this novel, and I think I've said that about previous novels in our series. Uh, Unfortunately, they're all vicious in different ways. We've got Agnes, who is the girlfriend of Joe Brody, and she has pretensions. Right when we meet her in the bookstore, she's trying to dress as a more high class lady than she really is. So that's role playing to get to your second criterion of a great
Thank you.
California novel.
You're saving
Um,
my thesis here. Thank you. Yeah.
yeah. So am I wrong? Are there are any virtuous women in this novel?
Uh, one at the beginning when he goes into a bookstore and he wants to find out. It's a bookstore across the way or down
Yeah,
the street from this pornographic book
Geiger's.
lender Geiger, which is masking um, uh, as a rare bookstore. He goes down the street to another bookstore and he talks to this young lady uh, and inquires whether she's familiar with Geiger. Has she seen the guy? And she gives a very close description of him. And then Marlowe says, "Hey, you could be a cop." She says, "I hope not." And they have a nice little exchange. She helps him out, but
Yeah,
that's a very brief appearance, so that probably doesn't count. But that occurred to me. And then toward the end of the book, which probably won't count in your book either, but this woman who is known as Silverwig,
yeah.
all we know is her first name, Mona. She's the
She's Mrs.
she's the
Mars.
girlfriend. She's Mrs.
She's
Mars,
Mrs.
right?
Mars still, so they
Right.
haven't divorced.
Right. Right. Yeah, I said girlfriend, but actually she is the Mrs. of Mr. Mars. And again, try not to give away too much of the plot, but toward the end of the book, Marlowe is he's hogtied,
Yeah,
and he is in this house with this Mona, first name, but in the book known as Silver Wig, because she's wearing a silver wig to cover her hair, which has been cut off. She's in hiding in order, well, we might have to say it, in order to make people think this is what her husband, the gangster Eddie Mars, has done. He has put her off outside the city of LA in this little house under close watch by his henchman Lash Canino. He has put her out there to make people think that she has run away with Rusty Reagan, with whom she was having at least a very heavy flirtation before Rusty disappeared. Okay, this is not the case, but she is out there. Marlowe, in looking for Rusty, the trail leads him out there. This Lash Canino and another fellow, they knock him out, they tie him up, and they go off to do whatever they're doing for an hour or two. And in the interim, they have a little flirtation, Silverwig and Marlowe, and she unties him. So that is the point. So, I mean, I find that to be a virtuous act, particularly when you're, you're under the sway of not only your husband, the gangster, but his very evil henchman, Lash Canino. You
Yeah.
could die for this. So I would call that a virtuous woman. Yes.
I agree. I would call it redemption too for her,
Yes.
because
Redemption. Yeah.
she is a vicious woman up to that point. She's an adulteress. She is
Yeah. Redemption.
colluding in
Yeah.
the cover up of a crime. And initially, when she's looking at Marlowe tied up, she sounds like she's got no sympathy for him. But interestingly, Marlowe, with his brilliant psychological awareness, he puts doubts in her mind about her husband's innocence in all of this, and she unties him. There's also a sexual dimension to that, where it it's implicit that Marlowe is actually using his attractiveness to win her over, and he kisses her, which I actually didn't find realistic. So in all of this tension, he thinks he's tied up. He could be. They're, for all he knows, they're digging his grave outside. They're going to drag him out there, shoot him in the head, throw him
Yeah.
in this grave, and he's flirting with Silverwig while he's tied
Yeah.
up, and he's got a terrible headache from having been knocked out for a while. I thought that was so. She unties him, and then he gets up, and the first thing he thinks to do is to stick his tongue in her mouth before he actually tries to escape. So I thought, wow,
Yeah.
either this guy's got he's got a lot of confidence, or this isn't really realistic. But yes, so the point is that there is a redemptive woman, and actually we should say more about that, because the novel ends, if you remember, the novel ends with Marlowe reflecting on Silverwig and hoping that they will meet again, but he doesn't think they will. So she is actually the ultimate romantic interest, which we should point out is contrary to the movie, because the romantic interest in the movie is the elder Sternwood daughter. All the way through, they are flirting all the way through the movie, and there is a grip in the car, so there is a clinch where Marlowe is hugging and kissing her, but it turns out he's only manipulating her to get information about Mr. Mars in that interest. So that relationship isn't going to go anywhere. She ends up paying him off, and she's clearly too vicious and crazy for Marlowe. But Silverwig, who still has a vicious past, she's redemptive enough, apparently.
Saved his life. I mean, come on. I just think
Yeah.
about a woman for a while after that too. A couple things on that, on the things you've been saying. First of all, note that although Marlowe is described as being, very attractive to women, and he has an eye for the women, he never sleeps with the women. And by the way, he doesn't do that up until the sixth novel when he does. But that's another indication of his chivalrous quality, that, this is a chaste knight. This is a Galahad, not a Lancelot. And
Mhm.
he's not doing it so much, I don't think, for moral reasons. Rather, he's not sleeping with the Sternwood girls, because we have to say that at a certain point, Carmen shows up naked in his apartment bed.
Yeah.
Right? And even then he just throws her out. Says, get out of here. He doesn't sleep with his clients' daughters. That's the reason he in fact gives to Vivian when they're having their little necking session in the car. So it's not that he's Uh, you know, he's no virgin at 33. I think that's his age given in the novel. Hardly, but he has a certain ethos, professional
Yeah.
ethos, and he will not sleep with his clients. And that's why you probably get the idea, Bruce, that, well, he might think about, he could consider sleeping with Silverwig. She's not a client, right?
No,
So
that's a
there's
good
that.
point. Yeah.
Yeah.
And yes, thank you. So once again, you've made me realize a lot of things about this novel that I had not realized on my own. And this metaphor of the White Knight is very, very appropriate. Yes, he is Galahad, and he, yeah, he's we've talked about his virtue, but his clearly um his his sort of what would you call it, the Western model for a virtuous man of his heroism, his chasteness, his self-sacrifice is very medieval knighthood or chivalry. So thank you for making me realize that. That's brilliant. In fact, um, we could say this is an Arthurian legend writ in Los Angeles in the 1930s.
I think that's fair because, as I mentioned earlier, Chandler was noodling around with Arthurian romance poetry when he was a young man, and he made no bones about it. You read his letters, you read his biographies. He was very uh, he was very taken with this notion of the chivalrous hero. He himself was very chivalrous. It seems when he wasn't having his sordid little office affairs or wild drunken weekends, uh, he was with whomever who wasn't his wife. Uh, he was apparently very chivalrous in his dealings with ladies, and yeah, a projection of his own personality to a certain degree, a vessel for his own hopes, uh,
Yeah.
for his own identity. This Marlowe character, where he had certain failings, but I think I think just to end the topic of women, um, uh, it 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 goes. I think it goes back to his having revered his mother and then having married this woman who was much older, who you maybe didn't, I don't know, but maybe you didn't have a maybe you didn't have a wild sex life with her, because he married her after she was 50. She's going into menopause or had gone through it. I don't know. Just, I don't want to get too into the uh, I don't want to get too detailed here in my conjecturing, but I should think that that might have something to do with this sort of chaste approach that he gives to his detective through six novels until then he finally breaks down. But when he finally breaks down the sixth novel and does go to bed with one of the women in the novel, not his client though, I don't think. His wife was on her deathbed when he was finishing this novel. So he may have been like thinking, well, okay, at this point, I have to start thinking about my future. And yeah, just
Uh,
an idea,
yeah.
perhaps
Well,
completely
no, that's
skewed.
that's a brilliant insight. It reminds me of C.S. Lewis, who is also celibate, and he ends up marrying a an American woman. Actually, she was an American woman resident in Britain. She was a divorcee, ends up marrying her because she needs to stay in Britain. She needs a residency. She's going to be sent back to America otherwise. And it turns out, she realizes that she can have half of everything, and he gets into financial uh, dire straits with her. But that's a celibate man, and the celibacy is comes out in C.S. Lewis's books because there really aren't any women. It's men going on adventures all the way to alien planets. and there aren't any women, or the women are side characters. I mean, um, yeah. So that's what I immediately thought of. All right, Kevin, you are brilliant as ever. There's one final thing we've got to do. We've got to talk about the title. So
Ah,
we get an explanation of the title in the very last page.
yeah.
Now, do you want to do the honors of reading that,
Oh,
or
I'd be happy. I'd be happy
yeah,
to, if you don't mind.
yeah,
Yeah,
do it in the authentic California voice of
you do a good
1939.
American accent, Bruce, but I think, for this we need a real
Yeah, yes, we do.
authentic.
Yeah, do channel Philip Marlowe. Come on.
Okay. So it has to be said before we go into this. This is the final page, and Marlowe has gone through all this stuff that we've been talking about, and he is he visits General Sternwood one last time. Sternwood is not looking too good. It looks like he's on his last legs. He's in his big canopied bed, described by Chandler as like the bed that Henry VIII died in. And then he takes his leave, does Marlowe, of Sternwood, and he goes to see Vivian one last time, and then he departs. He leaves the house, and I got to set it up a little bit. This passage about the big sleep. I went quickly away from her, down the room and out, and down the tiled staircase to the front hall. I didn't see anybody when I left. I found my hat alone this time. Outside, the bright gardens had a haunted look, as though small, wild eyes were watching me from behind the bushes, as though the sunshine itself had a mysterious something in its light. I got into my car and drove off down the hill. What did it matter where you lay once you were dead? In a dirty sump or in a marble tower on top of a high hill? You were dead. You were sleeping the big sleep. You were not bothered by things like that. Oil and water were the same as wind and air to you. You just slept the big sleep, not caring about the nastiness of how you died or where you fell. Me, I was part of the nastiness now, far more a part of it than Rusty Reagan was. But the old man didn't have to be. He could lie quiet in his canopied bed, with his bloodless hands folded on the sheet, waiting. His heart was a brief, uncertain murmur. His thoughts were as gray as ashes. And in a little while, he too, like Rusty Reagan, would be sleeping the big sleep. On the way downtown, I stopped at a bar and had a couple of double scotches. They didn't do me any good. All they did was make me think of Silverwig. And I never saw her again. So, I mean, I like that with this. You mentioned the thing at the end with Silverwig, because it takes kind of the sting off the sentiment, kind of a flip tone there.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, that's
yeah, I
right.
like that.
And also, I would say it suggests a sequel in which it
Yeah,
suggests, or at least it makes the reader think, well, this is where Marlowe could go next. He could actually run into Silverwig, and maybe there's something in that. You know,
right. But the
it
big sleep,
suggests,
exactly. But the
yeah,
big sleep. I mean, most people don't know what that's about, and I had no idea either, having grown up with the movie and having heard about the book, but having never read it till I was in my 20s. I always thought big sleep, big sleep. I'd never thought of it as being something having even to do with death. But there you have it. It's death.
yeah. Well, brilliantly read, Kevin McAleer, aka Philip Marlowe.
Well, thank you very
Thank you,
much.
sir.
I can only I can only hope that I read it in a fashion worthy of Mr. Chandler.
Oh
But
yes, it's
he seems to have been the one to have invented that term. He took credit for it himself. He
yeah,
said the big sleep is my invention, and he got very angry at Eugene O'Neill when the Iceman Cometh was produced. I think it was 1946, so 7 years later. And throughout the Iceman Cometh, there's a character who keeps talking about the big sleep. And then Chandler said, O'Neill's using this term like it's some kind of, popular slang. I invented it. Who knows what's the truth here? But that's
Yeah.
what Chandler said.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. So by the way, the only thing you needed for your reading just then was lighting from below, like I've got here, a very film noir touch I wanted to bring to the lighting here.
Yeah,
That's all you needed.
yeah.
But yes,
Scare
we will all
children.
look forward to the audio book of The Big Sleep read by Kevin McAleer.
Okay, well,
Kevin,
there you go. This is how I'll be able to make my living from now on.
yeah, well, don't stop writing.
No, no,
Don't
no, I
don't
shall
give
never.
that up.
No, you,
No,
nor you,
quite right.
nor you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, look, Kevin, as ever, you have stimulated my thinking on a great novel. You selected it. I thank you for selecting it, and I thank you for helping me understand what's going on in all its nuances. What a brilliant novel. I'm so glad that we got to talk about it. Thank you, sir.
Well, you're too kind as always, and I could return the compliments, but I won't because we don't want to turn into a mutual admiration society here. But I'm just glad you were able to read it because Raymond Chandler is my desert island author. If you had to pin me down to it, he would be my boy. He is the one I would like to
Wow.
uh, read if I had no one else, because you learn so much about writing by reading him. And both Bruce and I, being writers, this is this is half of my brain when I read these days. I'm always looking at the little tricks, little techniques they
Yeah.
employ. And Chandler is full of them. He can do anything. He can do high romanticism. He can do the swaggering sort of street slang. He can do the very clinical breakdown of a personality just through description. He can do action.
You can do
He can do
comedy.
mayhem. Saving the best for last. If you enjoy humor, read Mr. Chandler. And so I think the guy's fantastic, and yeah, I'm glad you were able to discover him.
Thanks, sir. As ever, I look forward to the next novel discussion with you.
Yeah, likewise. All right.